Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today I'm speaking with Ely Reyes, Director of Public Safety and Chief of Police at Cedar Hill. Ely, thanks for joining me today. Would you start by sharing a bit about yourself and how you got started?
Absolutely. So, like you said, I am the Director of Public Safety and Chief of Police for Cedar Hill, Texas. It's a community right outside of Dallas, just south of Dallas, about 50,000 people here. I've been here as the Chief of Police for a little over 6 years. Prior to that, I spent 23 years with the Austin Police Department, where I worked a variety of positions, achieving the rank of Assistant Chief of Police in Austin, Texas. And before that, I was in the Army for about 6.5 years. I worked in military intelligence and military police, did some overseas tours in Panama, South Korea, Cuba, and some other stateside assignments as well. So that's kind of how I got started in my career. But it actually, started way before that with a mentor of mine who was my uncle. So.
So, why don't you tell me about a few life events that shaped your leadership style?
Well, I would say it probably starts with my mentor, who was my uncle. He was my father grew up in a large family, 7 boys and a girl, so 7 brothers and 1 sister. They moved from South Texas to California when he was at a young age. The whole family moved over there to go work in the fields, and my grandparents were born in Mexico, and so I grew up in California. The youngest of the siblings was my uncle Juan Reyes. And since he was the youngest, when I was growing up, he was still in school. I watched him graduate high school, and then he went off to the Army. And then when he came back from the Army, he started with the sheriff's office and then eventually went to the San Jose Police Department. And so growing up, I kind of like saw him and how he handled himself as a father, a husband, a leader in his community, did a lot of volunteer work. He started the Police Athletic League in San Jose and a lot of other programs. And so just watching him as a man really inspired me to get into the profession and a life of public service.
Nice. How do you think that applies, and how do you apply that same mentorship in your work today?
Yeah, so what I like to do is I like to, just encourage my fellow officers and coworkers to remember that you get into public service to serve others, and just always remembering that it's not about you. It's about the people in your community, the people that you work with, and the people that really rely on you to guide them in their everyday here at work, or whether it's out in the field in our community.
Okay. Can you tell me about a mistake that significantly shaped your growth?
Just one.
You could start with one.
I think that for me, growing up, I played a lot of sports. That's what kind of like kept me busy. I played baseball, I played football, I played basketball. And then, when I was 15, we moved from California. Both my parents struggled with drug and alcohol abuse. And so we moved from California to back to Texas. I hadn't lived here, but that's where my father was from. And I lived with my grandmother for 3 years. And so that was pretty challenging for me. And so I had made a lot of mistakes as a teenager, just growing up and learning from those mistakes. But, I think that some of the things that in my kind of higher level leadership in the police department that I've learned is biggest mistakes that I think I've made over my career are not paying attention to the little things. So much of our time is focused on concentrating on the big picture and the big things that you think are the important things. But a lot of times it's those small little things that make the biggest difference for the line officer or the everyday person. Because if it's important to them, then it should be important to you. So I think along the way, I've overlooked what I would consider a minor thing and just kind of didn't handle it or didn't address it, and it came to catch up to me. And so I really tried to focus on listening to people, because if it's important to them, it should be important to me.
As we were growing up, I am sure we have all done a number of dumb things. One of the things that I ponder a lot, and actually your role in public safety probably you may have some interesting insight here, is I watch kids today doing dumb things as kids do, but they're on the internet that doesn't forget anything. How do you factor that into the world today?
with my own kids. I have a daughter who just graduated high school and is in college now, and a son who's still in high school. And you have to have those conversations with your kids and explain to them about how once you hit that send button, you can't bring it back. And so I'm thankful that there was no send button from when I was a kid, because I'm sure I did and said probably a lot of dumb things too. But I think that helping them understand the importance of words matter, and don't do spur of the moment actions, because those can come back. Even though you might be feeling very emotional and you might want to say X, Y, or Z, just understanding the impact of hitting that send button. One of the things that we do here is we have a youth summit that we do every summer. It's a free summer camp for the kids in our community. We usually have about 75 kids. And part of that summit is talking to them about social media and internet safety and things of that nature. And so I think it's, imperative that we talk about that as soon as we know that our kids are going to be using social media, or they're going to have a cell phone or access to it, and having those conversations with them and giving them an understanding of the impact of what they do.
Nice. So you talked about some time in the Army, a couple different police forces along the way. Was there a colleague or a superior officer that shaped your path that got you where you are today?
When I was in the Army, I had the opportunity to go a lot of different places and experience a lot of different cultures and a lot of different leadership styles. But, going from the military to, what I would consider a paramilitary organization in the police department, it was a pretty easy transition. But then just trying to find your path and what it is that what you want to do with your career. Early on, I was an officer, and then I was a motorcycle officer, and I got really interested in traffic investigations. And so when I got promoted to detective, I investigated traffic fatalities. That was my job. I went to accident reconstruction school and really focused on that. And I really enjoyed that. But as opposed to somebody who was mentoring me at that point in my career or leading me, there were some not so good leaders. I was happy being a detective, but I was thinking to myself, well, if I want to be better, then maybe I should promote to sergeant so that I could be a better leader for other people. And so I did that, and I actually was very happy being a sergeant. And so I was on patrol for a while, and then I got the opportunity to be at the training academy with field training officers and new recruits, and I really enjoyed that. And I thought, man, I could just spend the rest of my career here. And then we had a new chief of police come in to our city in Austin, and he did a little shakeup, and a lot of people didn't like it. And to be honest, I didn't like it at the time, but I was voluntold that I would be leaving the training academy and I would be going to internal affairs as an investigator. And I didn't like it at the time, but unbeknownst to me, the chief at that time really was pushing people in the organization that he saw as future leaders and trying to kind of force them to grow. And so getting out of my comfort zone at the training academy and then going over to internal affairs really helped me realize that I wanted to continue to grow as a leader in the police department and do more things, and that kind of like got me to where I am today. If I hadn't been forced out of the training academy and into internal affairs, I don't think I would be where I am today. And it was because of the foresight of the chief at that time. And several of what we called there was 12 of us that got signed over there. And there are several of the original 12 and more that came after that really, that was a launching point for their career, and they became assistant chiefs and chiefs in other organizations and things. And so I really think that was beneficial for all of us.
That's cool. Is that a technique you've used yourself?
I actually did here. I had a corporal who was very comfortable in his position, but I really thought that he would make a good sergeant. And so he had been in this position for close to 10 years. And so I moved him back to patrol as a patrol corporal. And then the next go around when we had a sergeant's test, he tested for sergeant, and now he's a sergeant today. And so I think it's important that you give your leadership teams an opportunity to experience different types of assignments so they can learn and continue to grow. It's a lot different coming from an organization of 1,700 people to one that has 70 people. The opportunities and room for assignments and for promotions is just a lot less. And so trying to find those opportunities to move people around so they can get some different experiences to help them grow as a leader, I think is beneficial.
Nice. So I'll ask you to think back to things going wrong and tell us about an example of maybe a security incident or an operational failure that taught you a valuable lesson.
When I was in Austin, like I said, I had opportunity to work a lot of different assignments. I worked in internal affairs. I worked in officer involved investigations, special investigations unit, where we investigated all officer involved shootings, any report of criminal activity involving an elected official or an officer. And we had a lot of high profile incidents. I responded to a lot of officer involved shootings at every rank, at sergeant, lieutenant, assistant chief. And to me, it just became like, okay, you know what has to happen, right? You know what needs to be done when you have one. You know there's going to be an administrative investigation that happens with internal affairs. You know there's going to be a criminal investigation that happens with whoever it is that conducts that, whether it's the Texas Rangers or the sheriff's office or your own special investigations unit. You just kind of have an understanding that everybody understands what has to be done. And so when I became the chief here, there had not been an officer involved shooting here in a decade. And thankfully, we hadn't had one. And then we did. We had an incident that involved an active shooter. Officers responded, and then we had an officer involved shooting in response to that active shooter incident. And it was then in that moment that I realized that I hadn't prepared my staff adequately to understand the complexities of what it would take to handle or respond to an officer involved shooting. There was a little bit of an understanding, but I kind of just went into what became to me second nature. But there was a lot of things that could have been done better if I had prepared them on the front end with just checks and balances, and maybe even like a different scenario where you just practice it. And so it was a learning opportunity as a new chief, trying to make sure that everybody had the training that they needed to respond to any type of incident, even though those incidents are very few and far between.
That's tricky because you want to focus on the things that you're actively doing, but you also want to be prepared for when those things you thankfully don't need to deal with all too often come up.
Yeah, the low frequency, high liability issues.
Yep. So what's the most rewarding aspect of your job?
For me, I really enjoy just being out in the community and having a positive impact on the youth in our community and having positive conversations with our community members and just learning about them, what their concerns are, what we can do better. And, really with the kids, when I was growing up, like I said, both my parents struggled with drug and alcohol abuse, and there was a lot of domestic violence in my home. And so just really being empathetic to people and their situations, and understanding, that, when people call the police, it's not because something good is happening in their life. And so when we respond, making sure that, we respond with empathy. And, I really like to have as many positive interactions outside of a police response. So I don't want to wait for someone to call 911 before they meet their first officer or before they have their first interaction with an officer, whether that be at a school or at a church or out in the community. And so just trying to find opportunities to have engagement and have that first interaction be on a positive note. So that way, when something does happen and they need you, they feel more comfortable with you, whether that's calling to report a crime or being a witness to a crime. And so just having those positive interactions on a regular basis, I think is beneficial.
Let's talk a little bit about how your approach to building trust in your teams has evolved over your career.
It's interesting because, with a large organization, you know, the higher up you go, the more people you have underneath you, right? And so At one point, I would say I probably had between 400 and 600 people underneath, me when I was an assistant chief. And so when you have that number of large people, it's hard to get down on the lower level and have relationships with people. And so it's a lot harder to get that trust from the bottom up than it is in a smaller organization. And so what I've learned here is that I really enjoy working in this mid-sized police department. I think that, when I first got here, I had a lot of individual one-on-one meetings with every employee, just to get to know them, just to try to figure out, what's going good, what can we do better, and those evolved over time. And I really think that it's almost like, when they make a mistake, they'll call or they'll say something like, "I messed up, chief." It's almost like they're your kids, right? Like they don't want to let you down. And so it's more personal. And so I think that, in the smaller organization, it's much easier to build the trust, especially the longer you're there, because they recognize that something happened and what was my response to that? Because they're going to make mistakes, right? And over time, they realize that, when they're right, that they're going to get 100% support from me. When they make a mistake, they're going to be held accountable. But it's not accountable like in, horrible way. It's accountable about, hey, let's learn from this, let's get better, and being consistent, right? And not treating one employee different from the other when they make the same mistake. And so I think consistency helps to build trust. And then it's always going to take time and scenarios for them to understand that, wow, this happened and he did have our back. And so, yeah, I do trust him. But it always takes time.
That it does. What is your definition of success?
And so I guess there's success on as far as a personal success as far as the organization goes,
Let's start with personal.
personal success. I just would say personally, I just want to do a good job. I want to be here for my team and make sure that they have what they need. And success to me means that we just talked about the trust. Success to me means that they trust me, and they know that I'm going to be here for them, and then I'm going to back them. And then from at home, I would say that my kids confide in me, which is really important to me. That I don't want my kids not to be able to talk to me. And so being a good dad to them and making sure that they have the confidence that they can just talk to me about anything. I think that's really important. And then, making sure that I carve out that quality time for, my wife and my kids. And so we lost my older son to cancer a few years ago when he got cancer when he was 16 and he died when he was 18. And that really helped shape or change who we are as a family, and how much we value our time together. And so I think that, success for me on that level is making sure that we don't take any day for granted and that we take advantage of the time we have together as a family.
It's the one resource you can't get more of. How do you define success for your teams?
I think that watching them be able to perform and function with minimal guidance or supervision means that as a leadership team that we've been successful, because we've been there to guide them and teach them, and then now they have their wings and they're on their own and they don't need us anymore. And so I think that for me is success, because you want them to call you when they need you, but you also want them to have the confidence in their own decision making and being able to make those hard decisions sometimes. Because when we promote leadership, whether it's a corporal or sergeant, in a small city, 2 o'clock in the morning, we might have a sergeant and 5 officers policing the city. And at that time, that sergeant, he's running the city, and he has to be able to understand that, his decisions can have significant impact. And so I think that just, knowing that they have the confidence and the ability to make those decisions. And are they going to make mistakes? Absolutely. We're all going to make mistakes, but growing and learning from those. And so I think success for the team is that they have the confidence to do their jobs, but they know that if they need something, that we're here for them.
How do you set up the framework around what's worth waking up Eli and What should you handle yourself?
I was very fortunate to fall into a really good team here. I have two assistant chiefs. I have some great lieutenants that have promoted since I've been here, and so there are very few things that I'm going to get woken up for. If it's going to be an officer who gets injured on duty, or if we've had to discharge our firearm in the line of duty. And so, outside of that, I have not really had to get woken up in the middle of the night for anything. Now, they do know that if they need me, I'm here. But a lot of times I'll wake up in the morning and I'll look at my phone, and we have this messaging program that we use, and I just go on there and read it and see what happened the night before. And if anything requires follow up, then, they'll usually send me an email just to update me on it. But for the most part, they do pretty good.
Is there any daily routine you find helpful?
Well, it is really what I call looking at what's the crisis of the day, right? Looking at the app in the morning and seeing if there's anything that happened overnight that I need to be aware of. That way I can make sure that my city manager, my city council and mayor are aware of it. And so just making sure that they're up to speed on that. But, going back to finding that quality time, in our school district here in Cedar Hill, they have a program called the Cedar Hill All Pro Dads. And I got involved with that as soon as I moved here. The former city manager here was an all pro dad and linked me up with them. And basically, it's just a group of dads that show up at the schools every morning. And then they help with the car line, welcoming the kids, giving a smiling face to them and open the door, tell them good morning, give them a fist bump. And so I've been doing that at my son's school when he was at the elementary school, and then when he transitioned to middle school and now in high school. And so, being there in the car line every morning is the way I start my day. But it's been interesting and fun to see these kids grow up, because most of these kids I've seen since fifth grade, and now they're in 10th grade. And so watching the change over time, watching these kids grow up. And again, that's, them seeing me as the chief of police helping with the car line in the mornings, and seeing that positive impact and that smile and that little, hey, I'm here if you need me, but right now I'm just trying to be a dad. But it's that's the way I start my mornings, and it's a great way to start it, and just puts a smile on my face being at the school and seeing those kids every morning.
That's cool. So sometimes we get overwhelmed, lose focus. How do you get back on track?
Oh, I tell you what, my wife has really been a rock for me. She's been a great sounding board, because you heard the terminology. It's lonely at the top, and there's a lot of things that happen that you just can't talk to anybody else about. And so, in having her there to be able to bounce things off of, and sometimes she's had to straighten me out about, hey, no, I don't think you should do that. I think you should do this instead, or think about this or instead of that. And so she's really been a good sounding board for me, and actually helping me make good decisions, because she has a different perspective. She's never been in law enforcement. She's in nursing, and so I think it's good to have a other than law enforcement perspective when it comes to some of the decisions that we make, because people see it in different ways. And so that, and then just trying to, find, a way to just relax and not think about work. And for me, I really enjoy playing Texas Hold'em poker. Don't do it very often, but when I get an opportunity to, really, it's just about being there at the table and the cards and the people there, and I really don't think about work. And so that's kind of a way for me to kind of unwind and relax when I have an opportunity to do that.
So, what is one thing you do as a leader that you would like to see more leaders doing?
I'll say that I recognize that the officers probably don't get to see the leadership team out in the field enough, because, we have a lot of administrative responsibilities that we're keeping up with. And so I've kind of made it intentional to work a couple of days out on patrol a month, a year. Specifically, I always work every 4th of July. 4th of July is it's a hotbed for a lot of calls for service when it comes to fireworks calls, and and people calling in, shots fired when it's actually fireworks calls. And the officers on patrol can kind of get overwhelmed chasing their tails, trying to run after those fireworks calls. And so I always work 4th of July. I tell dispatch, send me all the fireworks calls. This last 4th of July, my city manager rode out with me. And so she had an opportunity to work 4th of July with me and see, because we get a lot of complaints from community members about, fireworks. It's illegal, but it's very hard to respond to and to witness those and police those. I think that if you have an opportunity to spend more time in the field with your officers, that's going to help build those relationships. And then again, going back to that trust. And so I would say, find opportunities to be out in the field, whether it's, working a holiday. The other thing is our leadership team that doesn't have kids anymore. On Christmas morning, if we have officers that are working that have young kids, they come in, they'll work Christmas morning so those officers can stay at home with their kids. And so just really finding opportunities to make sure that your people know that you care about them and that, you want to be here and for them when they need you.
Probably also goes a long way to demonstrate you understand what it is they're doing and the work they need to accomplish.
It's interesting you said that because, when I first got here, they were surprised that I was like made a traffic stop, like the chief made a traffic stop, you know, or I backed up an officer on a traffic stop. If I see an officer pulled over and I'm driving by, I'm going to stop. And so they were just really surprised by that. And so even our dispatch center, was really surprised that, that was on the radio, and they're like, wow, chief's on the radio. And so, and it's interesting because they don't know me as an officer, right? They don't know what I did as an officer. They don't know what I did as a detective, what I did as a sergeant. They only know me as the chief. And so it's different when I would say, grow up in an organization because the people you work with know that you did an officer job and what you did when you were an officer, all these people you arrested and these investigations you did as a detective and, the supervisor, when you were a sergeant on patrol that you did, and so, but here I'm just the chief, right? They only know me as the chief. And so when I was riding out with an officer on patrol, we went to a call for service and they asked, do you need another unit? I was like, well, we're 2 units, I'm still a cop,
What am I, chopped liver?
we're a 2 officer unit. And so I think that, it is interesting though, when they have, only know you as the chief and, you kind of like have to, I guess, prove yourself that you can still be a cop too.
Say that sounds like part of developing that trust is showing that you know what to do and you can be out there too. How do you stay ahead of emerging trends while keeping up with day-to-day administrative responsibilities?
Yeah, so fortunately, we have a really good support here from our city council and city management when it comes to funding the police department. And so we do have, or I do have the opportunity to attend a lot of different conferences and training events that are kind of pertinent to keeping up with what's going on. And, when I was in Austin, I was the technology commander there for several years. And so I had opportunity to really learn about the impact of technology and how to use it as a force multiplier and how that can really help you grow your organization by utilizing technology that way. And so I think just going to the conferences, attending different meetings, we have a really robust North Texas Police Chiefs Association here. We have a meeting every month. We get together for lunches and just like networking, making sure that you talk to other chiefs, what any issues that they're having, because if it's happened at their department, it's just a matter of time before it's going to happen at mine. And so I really think that networking piece and going to the trainings and conferences really helps with that.
How do you know when you have an effective team culture, and how do you grow that culture?
So, what is the saying, culture eats policy for breakfast, right? Yeah. And so, when I got here, there use a terminology called the Cedar Hill Way, right? Doing things the Cedar Hill way. And really what that means is that no task is too small. That, let's make sure that we're not pointing the finger that not my job finger, right? And just making sure that you take care of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, regardless of what their request is, whether they're calling about, a squirrel in their backyard or in their attic, or, it's something very serious. but no task is too small. And I think that that culture was here when I got here, and we've been able to maintain that. And so it's all about making sure that when you are recruiting, right, that you're recruiting for officers that understand what your culture is and what the expectation is when it comes to taking care of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Our community here is it's a majority minority community. So over 50% of our community is African American, about 25% Hispanic. And, being a small suburb of Dallas, the people that come to live here really came here because they want their kids and their families to grow up in a safe environment. And we are one of the safest cities in our region when it comes to both violent crime and property crime. But the citizens here really trust their police department, and that's because the police officers have treated them with dignity and respect. Now, we don't have a lot of nightlife here. There's no bars, there's no things like that. So anything, past 10 or 11 o'clock at night, I mean, Whataburger's open, but IHOP, that's pretty much it, right? And so the officers are very active at night and making traffic stops, and because that's when you know criminal activity occurs at night. And so I always tell my community members, if you're going to be out driving past midnight in Cedar Hill and you commit a traffic violation, you're probably going to get stopped, whether it's a signal light or a headlight out or, something minor. And if you're just going home and you're not up to, anything bad, you're going to get off with a warning and you're going to be on your way. But it's that proactive enforcement is how the officers keep the community safe. And, I always tell them that none of my officers can ever say that the chief said you need to write more tickets. I've never told anybody you need to write a ticket ever. And I don't care if they write one ticket or they write 100 tickets, but I want them to be proactive, right? I want them to be out there making stops. You could write a warning for every stop that you make for all I care. Contrary to popular belief, there's no quota on the number of tickets anybody needs to write or the number of stops they need to make. You can do business patrols, you can do neighborhood patrols, you can do traffic stops on your free time. But we just want them to be out there and be active, and they are very active, and just showing a presence, because by showing a presence, then you deter crime. And so that's what our goal is, to deter crime, not to write a bunch of tickets or put people in jail. It's just we want to be a deterrent just by being visibly present in the neighborhoods, in the businesses, and on traffic stops.
How do you approach tough decisions?
It's a balancing act, because you have to make sure that the decision you make is based on policy, based on law, and whatever decision you make is going to have an impact on future decisions. And you also have to make sure that you're looking out for the officers and you're looking out for the city and the organization, especially in policing. There's always, you could always be subject to a lawsuit. I've been sued dozens of times throughout my career over a variety of reasons. Fortunately, none of them were ever valid, but it does happen. And so you have to really understand the impact of your decisions, and not just, on the individual or the organization, and how that filters down, because there's messaging that goes along with that as well. So when you have, whatever the decision is, if it's a policy decision, if it's a decision on the level of discipline, so you really have to understand what the impact is, and then the messaging that goes along with that. If it's something major, and this has happened several times here, based on the decision that I made a concerted effort to go to the briefings and have meetings with all the officers to make sure that they understand the decision that I made, why I made the decision, to kind of squash the rumor mill about what's going on. And so I think that, you have to really understand the impact of what it is that you're doing with that decision, and also understanding any type of, short or long-term implications of that decision.
What advice do you give most often to young people in your space?
You're probably going to find this, I have a conversation with every single officer when they get hired, and I had this conversation with every single officer when I got here. I talked to them about their finances. Nobody had the conversation with me when I was a young officer about 401k or deferred compensation or making sure that I was planning for the future. And so, this is a tough career. And, when you start this career at, say 25 years old, you spend 25 years doing this and you're age 50, most people aren't ready to retire financially when they get to be 50. But, you do this job for 25 years and mentally and emotionally, you will be ready to retire. And if you're not financially there, then you probably won't be able to. And then that could have a significant impact on your long-term health, both, physical and emotional. And so really explaining to these officers the importance of making sure that they start saving today, because police departments do have a pension. We do pay Social Security, but you can't collect that until you're in your 60s. But the pension that you're going to get from the police department is not enough for you to be financially stable outside of having a 401k or a deferred compensation plan. And so I have a conversation with all of them early on. I try to get them to start investing in themselves before they even get their first paycheck. Because I tell them, if you do it now, you're never going to miss it because you haven't got your first check yet. So just think of it as, an extra 5% that goes into this account and you're never going to see it. Just leave it alone. Don't worry about the stock market. It'll come back in 20 years or 25 years when you're ready to retire. But really, that's a conversation I have with all of them when they get hired.
Oh, that's cool. I don't think I've actually heard it put that way, but it's a really powerful thing given that, you're talking about a very intense career, and if you're not thinking about it from the beginning, that's going to be tough. How do you approach mentoring the next generation? You talked about, a few of your mentors. What's your path?
Just setting up your team for success and succession planning. I've made sure that the opportunities that my leadership team here have gone to some executive level leadership courses. You know, one of the ones I've been sending all of my assistant chiefs, my captain, all my lieutenants, I send them to a 3-week senior management institute for police in Boston. And so all of my lieutenants, assistant chiefs, and my captain have been to that training session already. And so it gives them an opportunity to learn about the administrative aspects of the job. The field work that we do in policing kind of just, you grow as you learn more. It becomes just second nature about, doing field work as a police officer. But as you work your way up the ranks, you really have to get a grasp on the administrative aspect of the job and being able to send these guys off to these different types of trainings where they can learn that. And then also involving them on the decision making when it comes to policy changes, really explaining to them the reason behind the policy changes. A lot of times, legislation changes and we have to change policy because the law changed. And so I think that, my one of my biggest shortfalls that I had coming in as a chief was not really understanding the finances associated with it and the budgeting process. Because when I was in Austin, we had a budgeting team and, they handle all of that kind of stuff. But here in a small organization, it's really starting at the sergeant level up and with the civilian supervisors that are really handling the budget. And so getting them involved on the budgeting process as well and letting them learn about how that impacts the organization and how we get the funding for that from the city and taxes and things like that. So I think really making sure that they have an opportunity to learn the administrative side. And I think that, if we can do that along every rank where you're planning for your successor, then whether it's me planning for the next assistant chief to be the chief or the next captain be assistant chief or the next lieutenant to be the captain, I think that we have to go down that stair and make sure that that lower level person is prepared to take that next step and they have the tools and the training and the skill set necessary to fill that role when the time comes.
Good plan. Are there any books, podcasts, classes, you already mentioned one, that you recommend to people?
So I'm not a reader. And I My commute is very short now. When I was in Austin, I did listen to a lot of podcasts because even though I only had like a 10-mile commute, it took me an hour to get there. And so now I have about a 20-minute drive. But I've been spending those drives with my kids. I'm teaching my son how to drive now. He's got his permit. Before that was my daughter driving me. And so I really cherish that time in the car with my kids. And so I have fallen off the podcast wagon. But when it comes to training, I think that identifying your shortcomings, right? A lot of times we get in our comfort zone and we want to get better at the things that we're good at, right? And so if you're good at something, then you become a subject matter expert, and then you just want to get better at what you're good at. And so I think that as a leader, if you can identify your shortfalls, your pitfalls, things that are affecting your ability to grow, and then identifying those and then seeking those out, I think are good opportunities because everybody is going to have a different shortcoming. I have never been on SWAT team. I am not a tactical expert by any means, but I make sure that I have a team that's in place to be able to fill those seats and have a better understanding of those roles that I do. And then I go to the executive level to understand from an executive level, if I respond to this scene, what do I need to do to provide them the tools necessary to get that job done? And so I think that when it comes to training, you can always find opportunities for growth, but identifying where your shortcomings are and just being real to yourself and seeking those out so that you can kind of fill those gaps.
So you talked about a pretty long sequence of events through, steps you've taken up the ladder. What would you say the hardest transition you faced was?
From assistant chief to becoming the chief, definitely the hardest transition, because when you're assistant chief, the you can always point up, to the chief. It's because he told me to, or because he said it, or you can but once you're the chief, the buck stops here, and there's nobody to blame but yourself, and you have to take responsibility for it. And so I think that making that transition and really understanding, like you said earlier, how do you make tough decisions and understanding the impact of your decisions, because at the end of the day, it's on me. And so whether that's, with one of my officers or one of the community members, or, responding to an incident and how we handle that incident. And so I think that that was the the toughest transition for me is, I would say going from the number two to being the number one. And so, yeah.
All right. Do you see any trends developing that are going to require us to change the way we lead our teams?
I would say that, incorporating AI into policing is happening right now. There's different tools out there now where officers are able to use artificial intelligence to help with report writing. There's technology available now where their body camera, can translate for them on the scene of a call. And so I think that, when you talk about your team, as these tools become available, making sure that you're up to speed on what's allowed legally and what the officers are doing to make sure that we stay in line with whatever the best practices are and whatever is legally permissible for us to do. Making sure we stay within those lines to keep that trust in our community that we're not doing something that's outside of what the expectation is, or we're not circumventing systems in place by using technology in inappropriate ways. And so I think we really have to make sure that we keep our heads wrapped around artificial intelligence, not only from our perspective, but also understanding how that could change our responses to different types of crimes out in the field. Because we've seen it already with these deep fake videos and these other things. And, there have been fake 911 calls for swatting incidents, where someone makes a fake call and it requires this huge police response. And so I think that, we really have to have a good understanding of technology and the role that it can play in not only helping us do our jobs better, but also adding to different types of crimes that we have to respond to that we're not really historically been prepared for.
There's a lot of change there. It's almost a little scary. So, when you're hiring for your team, what are the critical qualities you're looking for and how do you screen for them?
Yeah. So, I think that one, the state mandates, there's certain things that have to take place, right? But outside of those state mandates, what we really want is we want people that demonstrate our core values, right? And so with the Cedar Hill Police Department, we created some core values after I became chief here. I sat together with my leadership team and said, hey, we want to come up with some core values. What's important to you guys? What do you think should be important, to all the officers here, and something that we can stand behind? And so we use the acronym for CHPD. So Cedar Hill Police Department, the acronym. And then we have compassionate, honesty, professional, and then dedicated. And that's compassionate for concern and caring with people in our community, honest, integrity, and truth in all actions, professional in everything that we do, and then dedicated to building relationships that promote trust in our community. And so those four values right there, if you have those four values, then I think that you'll make a good part of our team.
Do you have any techniques for sussing out whether a candidate actually possesses those?
We have a lot of control over our hiring process. There are some police departments that are civil service police departments, and people have to take a civil service exam. We're not a civil service agency, and so we can have a test whenever we want. We have our oral boards, and so I think we have a little bit more control over our hiring process. And fortunately, we haven't been, right now we're hiring for 5 positions, out of, 73 officers. That's less than 10% vacancy rate, which, is great in today's policing world. And so we don't have a lot of vacant positions, so we can be very strategic about who it is that we hire. We don't have to just hire anyone, and we won't. Always told these guys in my recruiting team, I'll hold a vacancy before I hold a problem. And so we're not going to hire people just to fill a seat. We're going to hire people because they're the right person for the job. And the other thing that helps us out too is every candidate is required to do a psychological test, and they're required to do a polygraph. And so if there is a shortcoming in their responses or their application, or it'll come up either in the psychological or in the polygraph. And then they also have to go through an oral board with some seasoned officers and veterans that are going to ask them questions. And then they also have to sit down and have an interview one-on-one just with me at the very end of the process.
Sounds like a good process. All right. So unfortunately, I think that's all the time we've got for today. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow along with your work, is there a place they can go watch?
I would just say you can follow the Cedar Hill Police Department's Facebook page. We put a lot of information on there. We try to be as transparent as we can in sharing both positive information and information that's going on in our community. And so Cedar Hill Police Department Facebook page.
Amazing. Thank you, Eli. It's been a great conversation. Be safe out there, and hope to talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.